Good morning, everyone. My name is Tibisay García-Martín. I'm a doctoral student at UNED University, and today I'm going to talk about the concept of new audacity and contemporary rape narratives. In recent years, we have experienced a peak in cases of sexual violence, which has proven more than ever what a profound social and public health problem this is, and how, despite efforts to reduce and prevent rape and sexual abuse, not only it still happens on a regular basis, but there also remains a likelihood of underreporting. Feminism has had a profound influence on the public recognition of and the political responses to the issue of sexual violence. In fact, the consciousness rising of rape is often understood as one of the key drivers of the second wave feminist movement that arose in Western countries in the 1970s and 1980s. Feminists were instrumental in campaigning to bring the issue of sexual violence to community attention, debunking rape myths and reshaping rape criminalization by taking into account the survivor's point of view and putting their experiences of sexual violence at the center of the discussion. So, bringing public awareness entitled the need to move from talking about what was considered to be a private personal experience towards full political action. In that vein, the anti-rape movement emerged in consciousness-raising groups in which women shared their experience and then culminated in public demonstrations. The success of these speak-outs was the catalyst for the spread of a body of information and movements that dealt with rape from the political, social, and psychological point of view of its survivors. The emergence of late 20th century feminist scholarship also stimulated new discussions about rape, including the first and still most comprehensive examination of rape in world history, Susan Brown's Miller Against Our Will, published in 1975. In the 1990s and early 2000s, the movement against sexual violence also achieved a remarkable agenda, with the spread of rape centers providing support to survivors and with an intensified debate surrounding sexual violence due to some prominent rape cases and survivors' memoirs, which put the spotlight of rape as a social problem. However, as we all know, the turning point in how we talk about rape came with worldwide Me Too movement in 2017, when the New York Times ran a story about media mogul Harvey Weinstein and his story of sexual harassment in Hollywood. The magnitude of the problem was proved when, within days, social media was flooded with Me Too posting from victims denouncing their own experiences, which were before limited to private or intimate conversation or even to courtroom testimonies. It not only showed how social media and other public outlets were potential and powerful venues for individuals to process their experience and trauma with sexual violence, but it also served as a cry to denounce the largely ineffective legal procedures, the lack of attention given to bringing the issue to light, and the disdainful attitude towards pushing those responsible. Survivors were no longer afraid to talk about what happened to them, previously condemned to silence, but they also chose to talk in a way that indicated a change in attitude, form, and sometimes content. This is what Jennifer Cook has precisely been studying in recent years and has coined as the new audacity. This change in how current authors talk about their experiences and exhibit distinct features from its predecessors, mainly in the topics they choose to discuss, their experimentation with literary conventions and forms, and the shape their feminism takes. What can identify new audacity writer is their desire to speak boldly and differently in the service of a new feminist future, which is in turn what drives experimentation itself. In other words, common forms of autobiography that recount personal trauma and its aftermath tend to adhere to restricted and individualized conceptions of the self and its harm. However, new audacity writers go a step further and often reflect on the socioeconomic and political implications of their trauma. Current rape narratives, for example, divert from a mere way to share how rape and its aftermath are written and can in fact help shaping how survivors come to understand what has happened to them. But these autobiographical accounts of rape are both culturally and socially significant because they contribute to how women might resist the disempowering effects of being cast as a victim and can extend the emotional range of how rape survivors are expected to react to encompass anger, intellectual curiosity, and desire for compensation. Moreover, not only authors have the audacity to testify publicly about their traumatic experience with the given risk of speaking out publicly about your own rape, but it's even more remarkable for authors to write accounts of their rape when those experiences are clearly produced by specific socioeconomic context, which grant readers a wider view than the one that is usually provided by the lens of a personal tragedy. In doing so, Cook states that most of these writers refuse shame and stigmatization, reassess agency through witnesses, and most importantly, they offer a fresh perspective on their contemporary lives and on feminism in the 21st century. For Cook, the politics of each writer, both professed and rooted in the forms and style of their self-expression, help to delineate the contours of an emergent new audacity canon. The new audacity of the feminist writers Cook considers can be read in multiple ways. We can analyze how these different life writers challenge ideas about gender and genre, about power, submission, and victimhood, or even how do our own reading shape what the writers mean in the first place. In Cook's text, audacity is demonstrated by writing against all kinds of norms and expectations of sexual subjectivity, of gender, of victimhood and agency, and many others. The conceptual lens of audacity is here to remind us to read for transgression and to open a space to think differently and critically. To illustrate how the new audacity can be read, I'll be using some examples of Chanel Miller's 2019 popular memoir, Know My Name. To give you some background to those who might not know, Chanel Miller was raped back in 2015 and had one of the most publicized trials of that year. For the world, the man who assaulted her, Brock Turner, was a promising young Stanford University swimmer, while Miller, whose identity was protected at the time under the pseudonym Emily Doe, was described only as a 23-year-old drunk girl found half naked next to a fraternity house. In her memoir, she recounts what happened to her and the journey she went through in her high-profile court battle against Turner, who a year later was sentenced only to 6 months in county jail for assaulting her. The victim impact statement that Miller wrote for her trial went viral online, and years later she revealed and reclaimed her own identity by publishing her memoirs. In her book, we can see some examples of that new audacious tendency of life writing. It comes in the form of a retrospective warning and was born out of a victim impact statement that became a manifesto for all the Emily Does. There are several examples of audacity in it. One of the most courageous, I would say, is the sort of subversion of the feminist strategy of naming and shaming. Naming and shaming has been a familiar tactic to respond to rape and sexual violence, often used to face the failure of the justice system in prosecuting and convicting predators. In Chanel Miller's case, her rapist was brought to justice thanks to the intervention of some witnesses, so his identity was public from day one. However, she was condemned to anonymity, and Emily Doe became a persona who assumed all the traits of trauma and victimhood. When first reading her rape report, for instance, she says, "I decided right then it was not true, none of it was real, and the body being publicly taken apart did not belong to me. I suppose this was when Emily Doe was born. Me, but not me at all, and I suddenly hate her." So she differentiates between her and Emily, and she refused her fragility, how quietly she spoke, and seemed to know nothing. I quote from her. For Chanel, Emily assumed all the negative traits and trauma that comes with rape, and she felt, I quote her again, a go nowhere, do nothing victim. Because her rape was so well known, she had no need to name or denounce her rapist. Instead, she had to go through that process herself. She needs to name herself and reclaim her identity, exposing the ugliness of the process and how difficult it was to reconcile both identities, Chanel and Emily. She confessed how, in isolating her trauma, she became I quote here, "The voices that told her she was a humiliation should learn to think realistically. I told her she deserved the damage, questioned her instinct, how badly I wanted to abandon her, how little I thought of her life." And she continued to struggle once she released her statement, and as it became viral and began to be praised, she says, Emily was a hero, courageous and clear-headed, defiant and apologetic, a figure of truth and power. In this person, I did not see myself. So it is only at the end of the memoir, the last day of trial, that she stands in court seeing herself as the only one standing. It is also significant the fact that the only names used throughout the book are hers and her rapist. She says, this is because, I quote, in this story I will be calling the defense attorney, defense, the judge, and they are there to demonstrate the roles they play. This is not a personal indictment, not a clapback or a blacklist. I will use Brooks' names, but the truth is that he could be Brad or Brody or Benson, and it does not matter. The point is not their individual significance, but their commonality. All the people enable a broken system. In not naming them, I'm finally naming myself. Cook also talks about how the new Audacity writers challenge discourses of victimhood that damage women's agency. And in fact, one of today's challenges in writing trauma is how to do so, how to survive rape without victimhood, if that is even possible. Survivors of rape frequently stay silent to avoid public shame, stigmatization, and the label victim, or because they want to leave their trauma in the past. Chanel talks about the ambivalence of being a rape survivor and the expectations that come with it. But especially, she does it to highlight how contemporary society is failing survivors. And she does this throughout the whole memoir, but there is a specific instance where she recounts how Stanford University wanted her to use a quote from her statement in order to build a sort of monument in campus, but they kept rejecting all the quotes that she offered because they were considered not conciliatory enough. She quotes, as a survivor, I feel a duty to provide a realistic view of the complexity of recovery, but it is not my responsibility to alchemize what he did to me into healing words society can digest. I have been told that what I have to say is too dark, too upsetting, too targeting, too triggering. Let's tone it down. You will find society asking you for the happy ending, saying, come back when you're better, when what you say can make us feel good, when you have something more uplifting, affirming. This ugliness was something I never asked for. It was dropped on me, and for a long time I worry it made me ugly too. It made me into a sad, unwelcome story that nobody wanted to hear. So she clearly denounces how most times it seems that victims exist in society for the sole purpose of delivering an inspiring story, but she urges us to listen to rape stories with, I quote again, all the graphic and unsettling details, resisting the impact to turn away, instead looking closer, because beneath the gore and the police report is a whole beautiful person looking for ways to be in the world again. As Cook states, what might initially be recognized as factual descriptions of violence are actually accounts skillfully crafted to deliver maximum affective intensity. We can also see how that ugliness that Chanel talks about, and Cook also in her book, is crucial to this story. The ugliness of the self and its secrets, the ugliness of identity, and the ugly terrain of complicated contradictions in finding closure. And I would like to end with this last idea, the last thing that Chanel boldly exposes in her memoir, the idea of a happy ending and what comes with it. Subverting once again common perceived ideas of what being a victim is, she talks about retribution and rage, about how she is not writing her memoir or went ahead with the trial because she wanted closure for herself, but because, I quote, he might sit in a cell, but he will never know what it's like to be unhome from its own body. We don't fight for our happy ending. We fight to say you can't. We fight for accountability. We fight to establish a precedent. So here we have again the idea of speaking out, not only in hopes of finding recovery or personal development, but with the clear desire for being daring in wanting to change things. So overall, we can see that new Audacity does not conform with previous norms of conventionally personal private life writing, and Chanel Miller's Know My Name is an example of it. It shows different traits of it. naming herself and having a come out exposing her own identity, shaming her own shaming of Emily Doe as a turning against victim blaming culture, denouncing how dysfunctional victim identity is and how difficult it is to transition toward being a survivor without falling in the ugliness of rejecting what comes with being a victim. And finally, exposing the fallacies and the shame that and criticize women for having a non-normative behavior, not providing successful, inspiring stories that make us feel better, while we support and engage still a system and a society that are designed to crush survivors. New Audacity comes to sign that survivors have stepped onto their own side, and authors are once again defying silence by finding new ways not only to be heard, but to make them listen. Thank you.